Welcome to the channel. Today we're here to talk about the upcoming Anbernic RG557. And I'll admit the RG557 is the device I'm interested in, partly because I have the Anbernic RG556, and those of you who've been watching a while may know this. My reviews of the RG556 were some of the first videos on this channel that actually got a decent number of people watching them. So, and I'll link one of them in the description. It's very primitive compared to some of the videos that have been released recently, but still, I have a little bit of nostalgia for the 556 because it essentially helped get this channel off the ground. So we're going to talk about the 557 and what it brings to the table, perhaps, since we don't exactly know everything yet, compared to the RG556. But before we do that, let's take a look at the RG556 and kind of remember why it was a very interesting device in the first place. So here is my Anbernic RG556, and one of the things that I think is really outstanding about this device is that it is very comfortable to hold in the hands. If you're using playing games like PlayStation 2 games, it's very comfortable to hold on to. Hands feel good on the device. It has the appropriate controls for playing things like PlayStation 2 games. Got a 16:9 display that can handle things like PSP games. They look really good on this device. And this is one of the first devices I had that was I thought was, hey, this is really good in the hands. This is comfortable to play with, and I kind of liked it because of that. Now, that said, this device is of course not perfect. There are some issues with it that kind of prevent it from being, you might say, an in-game, Android device for playing retro games, at least retro games as in PlayStation 2 and systems like that, maybe Gamecube. And essentially, the flaws of this device are, number one, the joysticks on the device aren't that great. They have what's called cardinal snapping, which means it's hard for games that require really precise analog control, it makes the games harder to control than they should be. Now, for a lot of games, you probably won't notice the big deal. Like for Star Ocean, the controls are fine here. You don't really have fine analog controls in Star Ocean anyway. To walk, you actually have to hold a button no matter what kind of controller you're using. So you didn't have the issues with, say, Star Ocean that you might have with some of the more precise games. But still, the joysticks could certainly use improvement on the RG556. And, of course, the main issue, I think, with the 556 was the chip that's used to power it, the T820, is just not really powerful enough for what we want to do. So you're limited to some games not really working very well, and there are some games you can't upscale. I mean, you have a 1080p screen on the RG556, but sometimes you can't take advantage of it because the hardware is just not powerful enough to scale, say, a PlayStation 2 game up even much beyond native resolution. So the device was kind of weak. So it has excellent ergonomics. It's really good to hold in the hand. The buttons actually feel good. I'm not a big D-pad game player, so I'm not going to talk about the D-pad that much. But sticks could be better. All the triggers feel good and so forth. There were a couple other minor problems with the device, but the joysticks, I think, and the lack of power for some of the more high-end systems are the key drawbacks for the 556. And that goes even for some Android games. Like, for example, you can play Zenless Zone Zero on the RG556, but you're pretty much limited to 30 frames per second. You can't really get 60 frames per second to run reliably on this device. It's just not powerful enough. Even if you lower the graphics settings, you're not going to get anything close to stable 60 frames per second with Zenless Zone Zero. So high-end Android games, also this device is a little weak. A few minor problems, and the one that actually can be a deal breaker for some people is you can get video output via the USB-C port on the bottom. However, you cannot, because of the way apparently it's a bug in the chipset itself, but apparently you cannot charge and output video at the same time. So if you want to use this primarily in docked mode, or you want to use docked mode a lot, you're essentially going to be limited to the battery life of your device, because if you want that video output, you're not getting the charging. If you want the charging, you're not getting the video output. And hopefully, these are some things that Anbernic can correct in the RG557 without actually kind of compromising the feel of this device, the overall ergonomics, and the screen quality is actually pretty good on this too. This is one of the less expensive OLED Android handhelds out there. But hopefully what we're going to see in the 557 is Anbernic basically addresses the deficiencies without messing up some of the things that made this handheld actually pretty nice. With that said, let's actually take a look at what we know and what we don't know about the RG557. So, looking at the proposed specifications for the RG557, some of this we know, some of it's speculation and rumors. So first off, what kind of chip is powering the RG557? Answer, we don't know. At least not as of me recording this video. The speculation on this is initially perhaps some sort of Qualcomm Snapdragon chip. So one of these new ones that they're making for handhelds, but that has not been confirmed, and we of course won't technically know until Anbernic actually decides to tell us. Also, there has been some rumors from some somewhat credible sources that talk about, oh, maybe this thing's going to have the MediaTek Dimensity 8300 as the chip. And if so, we can actually talk a little bit about that. So if you look at the 8300, what you can see is that the original RG556 was powered by the Unisoc T820, which can run some PlayStation 2 games, a lot of them actually, compared to certainly older devices. But it can run a lot of PlayStation 2 games, but it doesn't quite have enough power to run the demanding ones. So you have no chance whatsoever at Champions of Norath on here. Jack games are not going to run very well on the RG556. And what we would like is we'd like a little bit more power. And based on the benchmarks that are floating around the internet for these two chipsets, the Unisoc T820 and the Dimensity 8300, you can see the Dimensity is quite a bit more powerful on paper at least than the T820, and I think that'll translate to performance as well. It's a little trickier if you're trying to compare to a Snapdragon, because for certain applications, the Snapdragons have drivers that some of these emulators can use and get more performance than you might think. But certainly comparing the Dimensity to what was in the RG556, you can see that I think if that's the chipset that Anbernic has chosen, that we will get much better performance for things like PlayStation 2, for things like Gamecube, and for upscaling other systems like PSP and so forth. I don't think anybody is going to have any problem with like the old 8-bit retro systems on this. But for some of the more modern stuff, I think this is going to be, if this turns out to be the chipset, I think it's going to be a way better device for playing things like I'm interested in, like the PlayStation 2. So, as you can see, pretty much every benchmark that you see, the Dimensity 8300 way outperforms what used to be, or what still is actually, in the RG556. So, back to the specifications here. So, we don't know what the chip is. We think it might be the Dimensity 8300 or some unknown Snapdragon, which we don't have any benchmarks for at all. So, no more speculation on that. As far as the RAM, the RG556 that is hiding behind our specification slide actually came with 8 gigabytes of RAM. I seriously doubt that the 557 will come with less, particularly since they're in their video, their promo video, they're actually portraying this as something that you might want to play high-end Android games on. And I think 8 gigabytes is probably the minimum you would want for that. So I'm thinking we're probably getting at least 8 gigabytes. And I don't know if they'd put any more in there, but I think 8 gigabytes is probably a fair bet. So the screen, From Anbernic's on release so far, they say it's a 5.48-inch AMOLED 1080p. Not 10,800, but 1080. So typo in the slide there. But we think it's probably 60 hertz, because if it had been higher, they'd probably have said. And the screen in RG556, and it's probably the same one, is also 60 hertz. So I'm guessing 60 hertz. So if you're probably looking to do the black frame insertion and things like that, you're probably going to be out of luck. So yeah, I wouldn't go into this expecting that. If this changes, well, we can talk about it then. But I'm thinking 1080p, OLED, 60 hertz, exactly the same screen, most likely that is in the RG556. So probably no change there. As far as storage, so we might get a little bump on storage over the RG556, but they haven't said anything about the built-in storage. You want a decent amount of built-in storage if you want to use this thing for Android. As far as emulation goes, they hadn't said, but I would be absolutely shocked if this didn't come with a micro SD slot. So usually you would use the micro SD slot for your emulation stuff, but for true Android games, you definitely won't, particularly if you're looking at Zenless Zone Zero and Fate Grand Order and all these games that take up multiple tens of gigabytes each. Then hopefully they give us a little storage bump, but they haven't said yet. It's going to be Android. We just don't know what version. So is it 13? Is it 14? You know, who knows? We'll find out later. But for the most part, I think which version of Android it's running is probably not going to be that important. You know, it's probably not going to be running something super old, but you know, probably similar to their other Android devices they're putting out now. As far as the battery, they haven't really said, but some digging around the internet suggests that it's probably going to have the same battery as the RG556, which would have been a 5500 milliamp hour. The RG556 actually had pretty decent battery life. So, you know, even with a more powerful chip, I think you're still going to get pretty good battery life. And if they use the Dimensity 8300, we may even have improved battery life over the 556, but we'll see. So specifications, you know, we don't know a lot of them that. You see a lot of unknown there in my slide, but, you know, we're not sure. Hopefully they won't be like Retroid and just string us along for weeks and weeks and weeks to figure out what the specs are. Usually Anbernic is pretty quick about announcing things. You know, when they say, here's a handheld, and they start making a video, well, they're going to be ready to ship not too long from now. So the specifications, you know, we're speculating today, but who knows? In a few days, we probably will know all of this stuff. So some final thoughts on the upcoming RG557 over there. I think that Anbernic probably has a winner here as long as the joysticks are good. Apparently, we don't know yet, but maybe they're using a new kind of joystick in the RG557. There's been some rumors on the internet about that. I think at worst, they might use the joysticks found in the RG406 handhelds, which are apparently a good bit better than the ones in the RG556. So the 406 and the 406H had improved sticks. Maybe the 557, in fact, I'm sure the 557 will have some kind of improved sticks. I don't think they'll have the same ones, because I think Anbernic is aware that people weren't happy with the way the joysticks performed on the RG556. Not necessarily a deal breaker depending on what kind of games you wanted to play, but definitely an area they could improve, and looks like they are probably improving on that, so that'll be good. And really, what chipset are they going to put in here? Is it the 8300? If it's the 8300 and it's a decent price, I think that the RG557 will definitely be a device to look at. I hope to look at one of them myself when it finally gets released, because I really like the RG556, except for mainly the lack of power. You know, fix that, and I think you have a very good device that's light. It's not tiny. You won't stick this in your pocket, but it is a light device. It's not too terribly big, and it would be a good way to play your, say, PlayStation 2, PlayStation Portable games, you know, Gamecube. on a device that is at least still easy to put in a bag, light, and actually feels good in the hands, which I think is a problem with a lot of the devices that are out now. Things like the Retroids. The Retroids give a lot of people, me included, if I play them long enough, kind of terrible hand cramps. They almost require you to have a grip. And this, you just have it the way it is, take it out of the case, you're ready to play. You don't have to fiddle around with grips or anything, putting them on, taking them off. So I think if they haven't really messed anything up on this, and they really have improved the sticks, and they have improved the chip so that we can actually upscale PlayStation 2 games and GameCube games reliably, then I think Anbernic may have a winner on their hands here. So we will hopefully see when the device actually releases, and maybe we'll talk about this again when we actually have some real specs. But for now, I think that's about all we're going to say on the upcoming RG557. And I'm going to link in the description, I'm going to link my original video on the RG556, which is somewhat embarrassing, but whatever. The production values aren't the best in the world. Neither was the camera or the microphone, but it was what it was. It was a year ago. Also, I'm going to link Anbernic's promo video, the only one they've released so far as of me recording this, for the RG557, so you can take a look at some of the gameplay performance that Anbernic is showing. Although I'd caution against taking too much from that video, because they don't really have any, stuff on here that shows you what the frame rate is, and we don't know what settings or anything they're using to run this stuff. So, take the promo video with a bit of a grain of salt, but it does definitely look more powerful than the RG556. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this sort of content, remember, leave me a like. It helps other people find my videos on YouTube. Also, if you want to see more content, not for just Android handhelds, but I do a fair amount of stuff with PC devices. I'm going to have a couple videos on some gameplay tests on the PC devices like the Legion Go and Steam Deck OLED, the MSI Claw, and the Ally. I'll have those coming up soon. It's just, I have a backlog here of videos I want to make, and time has been kind of short recently, but I think I'll be getting back into making more videos quicker now. So give me a subscribe if you want to see some of that stuff. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.